Hi folks, hope everybody's doing okay out there. Today we're going to talk a little bit about oil paints. As you know, I do the wet on wet style painting, which other people call the Bob Ross style or the Bill Alexander style. And we're just going to talk today about what kind of paints you might need to get started in this, some about a couple of different brands, and the different kind of paints that we use in this style is very particular as their oil paints. I would like to make this video. I haven't made a video for a couple days. It's been very cold here where I live, and I paint in the garage, so that has really kind of put a damper on the painting for right now. So I thought we could do just a little bit of talking about different kind of paints, the brands of paint, and hopefully it'll help you out. Like most of you, I started painting several years ago, and this was the first paint that I ever got. This is the Bob Ross kit that you can buy online or in stores, and this was my starter kit that I used. And as you can see, it came with a lot of these little tubes of paint, and I still have a few of those tubes. I haven't used them yet. This is my second kit that I bought. I used my first kit, and then I started buying some of the bigger tubes. And I really bought the second kit, exact same kit, really just to get duplicates of the brushes. As these little tubes of paint are nice, but they just don't go very far. There's not very much in these tubes. There's 37 milliliters in each tube. So I'm sure a lot of you have had some paints like this, these little tubes like this. I love these tubes. So in my opinion, to me, these are the best tubes out there. The way these tubes are made, the way these tubes are processed, they're made by Martin F. Weber. And these tubes, to me, are the best kind of tubes. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. But this is how I started out with these kind of paints. And this kit, there's a DVD that comes with it. And you can still buy these sets online. I've seen them sell for anywhere between $80 to $120, just depending on where you do your shopping. So it's a very good kit to start out with. I highly recommend it if you're going to start out doing wet on wet painting. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these paints. As I said, these are some of the paints that come with the kit. These are just different colors. We have phthalo blue, sap green, and the bright red that come in that kit, along with white and black and cad yellow that also comes in that kit. But what I like about these tubes is they're kind of a plastic rubber. They're not metal, and they're not just straight simply plastic, but they're kind of a plastic rubber. And what's good about that is that they resist to cracking very well. So that's one reason I like these Bob Ross tubes. This one, coincidentally, was made by Dixon, which is who makes the Bob Ross brand now. But the kind of paints that we use for oil paints are oil paints that are very firm. We've heard that said by Bob Ross and Bill Alexander lots of times. And what that means is, and I'm going to try to show you this up close. What that means is, if I can get the camera to focus in here, when you squeeze a tube of paint, and I'm probably going to get this all over me. When you squeeze a tube of paint, you should use the green here. Maybe you can see it better. I don't know. You see how that sticks out of there like that? And it stands up like that? This paint is very firm paint to be able to do that. To stick out of that tube like that. To stand up, 3/4 of an inch or so. This is firm paint. This is the kind of paint that you need to use for the wet on wet style. Let me find a paper towel or a napkin here. I can wipe that off. Any other kind of oil paint that is not firm, that is very soupy or wet, just will not work for this kind of painting method. The reason is that we use thinner paints to go over top of thicker paints, and that is why you have to start out with the thickest paint possible. So that's why we start out and use this kind of paints when we're doing wet on wet. Other than the Bob Ross brand, there are several other kind of paints that you can use. This is Master's Touch paint, and I believe that this is sold by the Hobby Lobby stores. As you can see the price on them, if you can see it, this tube of paint here was $14.99 each one of these tubes. And there's a lot of paint in these tubes. There's 200 milliliters in each tube of paint. So you could use one of these tubes and paint for a long time, make a lot of happy trees with them. And I've used this brand several times, and it's a good brand of paint. For cheap paint, it's a good brand of paint. Another brand that we have is this brand called Premier. This is a brand that I can't remember where I got this at. Perhaps a Hobby Lobby sells these, or maybe Michael's, I'm not sure. But it is just for what we use, it's very good paint as well. Now, getting into these kind of tubes, as you can see, this is a metal tube. The metal tubes are fine. The only thing is that they will start to crack. Eventually, squeezing them, rolling them up, trying to get the paint out of them, they will start to crack. So, other than that, storing paint in them is fine. There's no problem with it. I have heard some people say that if you're using titanium white and you squeeze it out of the tube, it has a gray tint on the outside of the paint. That's because it seems like the metal on the inside of the tubes is oxidizing somehow with the paint. So that is a negative on them. But as far as using them for any other color, I've never had trouble. Moving on to, these are one of my favorite paints. These are Gamblin 1980. You all have used these, I'm sure. If you haven't, I highly recommend them. These are 150 milliliter tubes, and I can't quite remember the price on these, but it's somewhere around the other ones, somewhere around $16, $18 a tube. They're very good paints, and I highly recommend them as well. Another kind of paint that we have, and this was one that I found most recently, is Montmartre. This is a paint that I found online. I believe it's a business that's not even in the United States. I think they're maybe in Australia or somewhere. I can't be sure. But they sell through Amazon. And that's where you could buy these paints is Amazon. These have the plastic rubber type tubes, so they don't crack as easy as the metal tubes. They are very, very nice. They have easy caps. This is a 100 milliliter tube, which is not quite as much as the other. And I can't remember exactly how much I paid for them, but it was considerably less than what I paid for the Gamblin paint. So you could get online and get some of this. They don't have quite the same colors, maybe some of the traditional colors, but they do have a lot of the same. They have titanium white, and you see they have yellow medium, burnt sienna, but they have some other colors too. Like some of these greens are very, very nice to use, very bright type of greens. You could try them. Like I said, for the cost, they were significantly different. I highly recommend them. I tried to use new tubes, and I don't have a new tube of this, but this is Winsor & Newton oil color, and these are fantastic paints as well. They sell a lot of paints online. They're reasonably priced, somewhere around $18, $20 a tube, I think. This is a 200 milliliter tube, and they do quite well. Like I said, back to the metal tube, back to the metal part again. They are metal tubes. To me, that just invites cracking. And what happens, what can you do if that does happen? Well, here's what I did. I just took some saran wrap As you can see, this tube somewhere around in here, it cracked and it started leaking out just from me squeezing the paint and rolling it up or whatever. It started to crack, so I just took some saran wrap around it, trying to keep it. It's not really going to hurt the paint inside. The outside of it might get a little crusty, but the paint on the inside will be fine. But as you know, this phthalo blue is like grease. Once you get a little bit on you, it seems like you have it all over you. This stuff is so strong. So that's one thing you can do to keep it off of you. Here again is one of the Bob Ross, the newer tubes that has the metal on it. And as you can see, I'm starting to get a little crack in this one right here. When I paint, I don't use a lot of paint. I use a little bit of paint. A little bit of paint will go a long way sometimes. And what's the point in wasting a lot of it, in my opinion? You can squeeze a little bit out on your palette. If you use that much, about a 50-cent piece. If you use that much, you've always got your paints there with you. You can just put a little bit more down. You don't have any waste. Here's another brand. They use a metal tube. This is called Blick. This is Blick Studio Oil Colors. And they are good paints as well. This one is ivory black, which I prefer midnight black, but sometimes it seems like other than the Bob Ross brand, it's hard to find midnight black. So this is ivory black. For what I do, it suits me just fine. But like I say, you go back to the metal tubes again, but it's really not that big a deal. On to your first coat, which is what Bob Ross uses, the Bob Ross Liquid White. This is Liquid First Coat, if you can read that. This is the brand that's sold by Hobby Lobby. And if you can see the price on there, I think it says about $22. This is a big can. This is 18 ounces, 473 milliliters. And this is, I bought this a long time ago. I've been using this for a couple of years now, as it doesn't take a whole lot of liquid white. And it's really good. For the price, it's really good. As far as the Bob Ross brands, this is a can of Bob Ross Liquid Clear. This is the first can I ever bought of this, and it's still probably about half full. As Bob has always said, a little bit of this goes a very long way. So I don't use a whole lot of this when I use paintings. Just a little bit. Liquid Black. How many of you have used Liquid Black? I think I've used this maybe once or twice, and that's about it. There's a lot of paintings that you can do. Top parts of the painting in liquid white, the bottom parts in liquid black if you don't want to use black gesso. But a can of this will last you probably the rest of your life too if you buy it. Speaking of gesso, this is the gesso that I use. This is Bob Ross gray gesso. It's good to use gray gesso on. You can put this on any painting that you're doing that you're going to put liquid white on, and it makes it easier to tell where you have applied liquid white if the canvas is gray. This is very good stuff. You also use this to make moons or whatever. This is the black, which I use a lot of the black. Any canvas that you're putting darks in, of course you can use the black gesso to paint the first coat. Makes it very easy to go over it instead of applying a lot of the dark oil paints. You can just use the black gesso. Speaking of using clear coats, I have to move the camera. I have to move the camera because the camera's propped up against this. This is Gamblin linseed oil, if you can see that in the camera. I've started using this instead of using the Bob Ross Liquid Clear. To me, I like it a lot better. I can put this on thinner than I could put this on. To me, this has always seemed kind of thick, even though it's supposed to be a clearing liquid. To me, this has always seemed a little bit thick. So I do like this linseed oil a lot better. It's a lot easier to get less on, of course, than using any other kind of liquid clear. And that's about it for all the paints we were going to talk about this evening. Of course, there are a lot of different brand of paints that I've showed you. You can get on the internet and look. Wilson Bickford, Kevin Hill, Brandon Thomas. They all sell their own brand of paints, and they're all very good paints, and I recommend them as well. The one thing that you can do is go to jerrysartorama.com or dickblick.com and look at all the different paints on there. You'll see some of these paints that we've talked about today, and you'll see a whole lot more than that. So to me, in my opinion, when we're using paints and we're starting out as a beginner, don't buy the very expensive paints. Don't buy the very expensive canvases when you're going to be doing paintings. If you're doing a lot of practice, or if you're doing paintings just to give to family, if you're going to be doing paintings to sell, even that, you can use some of these cheaper paints that we've talked about, and they're just fine. There's no problem with using these kind of paintings to sell. The type of painting, the brand of oil paint that you are using is not near as important as the fact that you practice and that you learn how to make different effects better. That's what's most important. Above all, the idea, of course, is just to have a good time and that you learn something every time that you paint. So I hope this video has helped you to learn a little bit about some of the oil paints that we can use and how that they can use. You can use different brands. Don't be brand specific if you don't want to. A lot of people say, what kind of paints do you use when they ask questions? And I usually say, whatever's cheapest. If I can get some of these on sale online, different websites have sales at different time of the year. If I can get one cheaper than the other, I will. If I need something real quick in a pinch, I can run down to Hobby Lobby, get the Masters Touch brand, and even though it may not be as good as the Winsor & Newton, for me, it works just fine. Next time, we're going to talk about brushes and the different brushes that you might want to use, but hopefully this will just help you out to learn a little bit more about oil paints. Take care and happy painting.